bin folder. It's still...
There's nothing in the bin. It's empty. Shall we look at it again?
So it compiled everything in memory. There's still no...
Now, artifacts that get built, I believe, get built up at the solution level. I don't know if you saw it. So here's my solution folder.
Okay.
And there is this artifacts folder. And this is where, like if there was something being built, it would go here. But you can see that the bin folder for MVA demo is empty.
Nice.
Now, if I wanted to have something show up here, you can do that, and you can do that from within VS. So if you go to this class library and you actually want to turn this class library into a NuGet package, a nupkeg, as some people say, on disk that you can upload to NuGet.org and share with the world. How do you do that? You right-click Properties, and in Build, there's this Produce Outputs on Build checkbox. That's the magic checkbox. Save that guy. Let's build again.
Little big font, small font action.
Yeah, sorry about that. It does save. There, see?
Somebody will fix that.
Yeah.
I'll file that bug right now.
And let's see if we've actually got something under bin now. So there's class library 1 shows up now under debug. We've got NuGet packages and simple
Interesting.
packages.
So produce output doesn't mean make DLLs. It really is all about NuGet right now.
All about NuGet.
And I assume the DLL's inside the NuGet then.
Yeah. These are the folders that were used to actually produce those NuGet packages, and inside the NuGet you'll find exactly.
And you even made debug symbols as a parallel NuGet, an optional parallel NuGet. Very cool.
That's right.
I like it.
So very easy to add, remove, install, create NuGet packages is a key concept in ASP.NET 5. All right, so that's that part. Okay, what else do we want to do here? So we did references, we added Project JSON, we did in-memory compilation, there's nothing in the bin. Oh, let's talk about cross-compiling just a little bit. So you notice that I'm referencing multiple projects. If we go to, let's see, let's go to the startup.cs. And let's look at some IntelliSense here. I don't know, what's an interesting class that we could do?
System.xml. You have that?
XML. I mean, we don't even have that package reference. I don't know, like a string. Let's just something random.
Okay.
Let's get that guy going.
So what are we doing?
We want to see. Maybe it's only for.
What are you trying to do?
I want to see like a combined IntelliSense. Why am I getting combined IntelliSense right now?
I saw it when you did down at the bottom there, when you were doing context.response.
Yeah.
Maybe you got like a pop-up when you said write async.
Let me do it here and see if I can get it to. So what I should.
You've got a daily build of your Visual Studio here.
I know. It's very
You're
exciting.
living on the edge.
We want types. There, that's the guy we want. Okay, see here?
Oh, look at that.
It only shows up probably if there's a difference, that when you have like a difference between the different target frameworks. So you notice here that HB context 5.0 not available, core 5.0 available. What this is trying to do is give you a view into which APIs are actually available when compiling for that particular target framework, and which ones are not. Like which ones are going to cause problems if you use them, and which ones will not cause problems if you use them. So this hopefully gives you right up front, like when you're trying to what you're literally doing is cross-compiling for multiple target frameworks at the same time. As you cross-compile, IntelliSense will sort of guide you and say, hey, these little warning icons are saying there's something that could be different here.
Well, it says there you can use the navigation bar to switch context. What does that mean?
Oh, yeah. So if we go, let me undo what I just obliterated here. If we go up here, there's this drop-down that lets me pick which sort of lens do I want to have over this project. Do I want the ASP.NET 5 lens or the ASP.NET Core 5 lens? And that can be useful because you're probably going to, in some cases, need to be able to cross-compile. And then when you cross-compile, you're going to be like if-defing. So let's add an if-def.
And if-def, I think, is one of those things that people who have been doing C and C++ are familiar with, but not every .NET developer's used an if-def before.
Yeah, this is normally, to be honest, you don't need to cross-compile your web application to multiple target frameworks.
You just need to pick a framework.
You would just pick one. You could just delete the target framework. You literally just delete it from underneath the frameworks node in your project.json, and that would basically say I'm only going to compile for this thing. But if you want to keep that flexibility, just in case I want to go to ASP.NET Core, .NET Core, how can I do that? Then you would be cross-compiling for it.
All right.
So, and the way you cross-compile is you just use the framework moniker. So ASP.NET Core 5.0, for example, would say, if I'm compiling for ASP.NET Core 5.0, then do this. And if I don't know, let's put a little var or whatever.
And that's gray because we're not in that context.
Yeah. So currently my lens says ASP.NET 5.
Okay.
So this is saying this code isn't relevant for this particular context. If I switch it to ASP.NET Core 5.0, then it's like, oh yeah, this code is now going to be part of the build, and it'll give you IntelliSense.
And because you're referencing both, when you build, you are really building it twice.
Literally building it twice.
All right.
And you'll see those compilation errors in the error output window as well. Okay, so
cool.
Move that. All right, so that's cross-compiling, and we already produced the NuGet packages on build. So I think we know the project system now. I think we should start adding some more stuff.
Yeah. Let's talk about building.
Let's talk about the actual application. So the next topic is we're going to talk about building ASP.NET 5 applications. Like, what does it mean to use this new HTTP request pipeline? Okay. So when we were talking earlier, we added a new NuGet package. Let's see if I still have it in here. Well, we added a class library. Let's add another dependency, which is that diagnostics package that we had before. And what this is middleware. When you're defining your request pipeline is made up of middleware. Before, you may have talked in terms of modules and maybe handlers. In ASP.NET 5, you're talking about middleware. And a middleware is something that it has a request delegate that takes an HTTP context, does some work, and then also has a next pointer. It has the option to also call the next guy, the next request delegate, essentially. And so you get that. What that means is you have a lot of power. In your middleware, you can do your stuff and then call the next guy. You could do your stuff and then just ignore the next guy and just return. That's kind of what that run method was doing, is it was just saying, I'm the request delegate that matters and nobody else matters, and so I'm just going to ignore anybody else in the pipeline. You could run some logic, call the next guy, and then after they come back, run some more logic. So you have complete control in the pipeline about where you do things relative to the next person in the chain. It does mean that order matters. Like, you order these middleware very carefully to make sure that they behave appropriately with each other.
So is this a more flexible kind of HTTP handler and module kind of joint? It's brought together. I can do the same stuff a handler can do. I can say I'm the only handler.
Yep.
And but at the same time, I could be a module that gets along with other modules.
Yep. And it's much more, in some sense, simplified. Like, the modules had a lot of, pipeline stages.
Right.
You have to learn what all those stages are and when they go. In this case, it's just one concept, which is your request delegate, and then the next request delegate. And you either call the next guy or you don't. And when you call it is up to you.
So it sounds like it's simpler, but also more powerful.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, so let's use some middleware. So when you use middleware, and that's an important word, use, my app.use middleware. And here, if we look at the IntelliSense, it's a func that takes a request delegate and returns a request delegate. And that returned request delegate, that's you. And you either call the next guy in there or you don't. And you can like inline, lambda your own.
That's a little advanced.
If you want to, it's a bit advanced. So normally you're just using middleware that other people wrote, and we've written a bunch that you can just take advantage of and use for your own purposes. For example, in the diagnostics package, there's a simple use welcome page. Make sure that actually restored correctly.
I don't think you saved your project.json.
Save my project.json.
So when you save it, that's when the moment, there you go.
There it goes, and that should disappear. Okay. So all this pages is something really simple. It's like, is your server running? Do you have something there? Then you can put a little page there to see if it's running. Let's actually see if my server is running. Okay, great. So that's
so interesting. So that's the thing that makes the blue page.
Yes.
I always wondered what would make the blue page.
It's its own little run method that's saying, I don't care about the next guy. I'm just going to take the request and return this lovely blue page.
Cool.
That's what does that. Okay. We could also this package has also an error page. This is the YSOD.
YSOD. Use yellow screen of death.
It's not yellow anymore. Is that?
Let's see what it looks like.
Okay. Let's see if people like it. So I want to use the error page, which means I need an error. So let's create an error. So app.run. And we'll do that context. Let's throw an exception. I think I have to put this in curlies in this case for some reason. So throw invalid operation exception. How about that?
Very useful application.
Yeah, so all this app does is
throws exception.
Shows you the yellow screen of death.
That's good.
All right, let's look at it. We got a yellow screen. There's a yellow screen of death.
That's actually a really useful looking page.
So this has your stack trays. It's got query parameters.
Look at that.
Cookies over there, headers. The environment. It's all there. So that's the page that will get rendered.
ASP.NET, where getting an error is a joy. That's really nice, though. I like that.
Good.
It's got a lot of good context.
Now that would be a page you would use when you're under development. Like, that's not information you probably want to share with the world. So there's also a notion of a error handler, which is the idea that instead of instead of just displaying a yellow screen of death based off the exception, like go to a nice page that will display an oops thing, and you have an option of putting here a path, like I don't know, oops. I guess I could put it to HTML page. And
it sounds like middleware can do a little bit or a lot. In this case, it catches the exceptions, it logs the exceptions, it does 3 or 4 different things. It's not necessarily does one single responsibility.
Yes, yeah. It's a single piece of middleware generally has one piece of responsibility, and you compose them. It's very composable notion. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
All right. So this way, if you get an exception, then direct you to like HTML page.html. I think that works. Let me see if that works. Does that actually work? Oh,
that's a different error page. What's this about?
What does this say? So this is the IS server. This is an IS server error page telling me that you did something wrong. Like you messed something up. So this is saying that there was, what does this say? I don't know. I've obviously done something wrong.
Argument exception. So it doesn't like HTML page as your thing that you passed in.
Yeah, what did I?
Maybe it needed a slash.
Maybe like that?
I don't know. I'm impressed with the attractive page, though.
No, so not like my
Pretty cool, though.
But anyway, it should be. It should go right to the HTML.
That's all good.
That's preview bits or probably user error in this case.
Yeah.
But let's look at some other more interesting middleware that we've maybe a little bit more practiced dealing with. So we did we did error page. Oh, let's switch it to the let's get rid of that.
Yeah, let's make it go back to saying, you can just Control Z your way back to saying hello.
All right, yeah, let's do that.
Oh, you're going to go with the permanent error?
And then I want to switch this now to run on something other than IIS.
Okay.
How do I do that? So let's go to project.json. And the way we need a new package in order to make it run on an IIS. We need another server. Like this is the IIS server package. Let's do Microsoft ASB server, and let's use web listener.
Okay.
Okay. Now, what is this package? So this is another server that I can host on top of instead of IIS. I'm going to leave the IIS one there just for that doesn't hurt anything to have it there. And what this server is basically just like raw HPSys. Like I just want to host my web application right on top of HPSys. No IIS in the picture, no process management. I'm going to do it myself with my own process. Now I need then to be able to run that thing. So I'm going to set up a command to actually run this app on top of Web Listener instead of IIS.
Okay.
Visual Studio normally takes care of running on top of IIS Express for me. But in the case of if I want to run on a different server, I've got to take care of that myself. So I got to tell the system what I want to do. So we do that with a command.
Okay.
And I'm going to set up a web command. And this is going to be a little, normally you don't have to hand type this in. In fact, I could just copy it from we normally just give it to you in the templates. And
I see, but you made an empty template.
I made an empty template which did not have it. So here, for example, is the web command that I'm about to use. And you can see you can do lots of different commands, like there's EF commands in there and so forth. In this case, I'm just going to do a web command.
So a command can be all sorts of things. Run a web server, test something, run migration.
It's just a static void main function to do whatever you want. Now, the static void main function in this library, ASP.NET Hosting, is for hosting web applications. And it's passing it a couple of switches to say, please use Web Listener. I want to use the Web Listener to host on top of, and please host it at this URL. Let me pick a different URL. Let's do 5001 just to make sure we don't have any accidental conflicts.
In that comma at the end there?
That was not right. We should get rid of that. That's why I had a little squiggly. Okay, and now to tell VS when I hit like F5, I want to run on that thing. Right-click here. We can go to Properties, and under Debug, we can now see that command shows up. So that's kind of cool. Okay, so save this. So now, instead of having IIS Express fire up whenever I run this application now, it's basically going to fire up a little console app and execute that web command, execute that main function to run it on Web Listener. Let's see if that works. Cross fingers. It says started. That's hopeful. Let me pop up an impartial third-party browser, and let's go to localhost. Not 5,000. Not 5,000. And we should see. If I remember correctly, I didn't add the hello world back, so it should
be an error.
The blue screen of death.
Yes.
The
attractive screen of death.
There it is. Now, interesting is that if I, let's go back to CS. If I don't have this lovely error page, right?
Oh yeah. What would you get if you have an error with no error page?
That's right. There's no error page. Let me run it again. Restart the server.
Now you had to restart the server because there's no watcher in that case.
I think there is actually watcher support, but I don't know if it's wired up in this particular build. There's a watcher that can do similar things with the self-host case. Now, what's going to happen here? like nothing. But you see, I see internal server error at the top, which means Chrome is saying a 500 came back, but there was nothing in it. There was just an exception, and they returned to 500. There was nothing to actually produce that error page. So this is one of those cases where this server, like HP Sys, doesn't produce error pages. Like if you had done this on IS, it would have actually produced
you get the different error page.
frowny face error page.
Right.
Here you don't get it. Same thing if I go to my web root. If I go to HTML page, HTML, there's nothing there.
Because you never told it to.
Yeah. So there's another piece of middleware that we can use to fix that.
Because the web listener is not IIS, and it does not return any static stuff for you.
Yep. So if we do app. I think I have to add the package.
It's definitely a lot more control. You really have absolute explicit control over everything that happens. It's almost like it's also less of a black box.
That's less of a black box. If the nice thing about this actually is there was stuff in ASP.NET today that was there, and you really couldn't get rid of it very easily. There was some overhead that you were kind of stuck with.
Yeah.
In this world, if you want to strip it way down and have like bare metal, blazing fast performance, you can do that. Like if you don't need static file middleware, don't add it. There's no overhead for having it. If you don't need the error page, don't have it. You can have complete control. So the package you need to actually enable static files would be the static files middleware. So now, and I can say use static files here.
So when you add a middleware, it adds an extension method into I application builder.
Yeah.
That's the standard convention.
Use and then the name of the middleware that you want to actually run.
Okay.
All right, so then we said started, and I should see my HTML page back now. There's some place.
Nice.
Okay. So that's building a request pipeline and how you deal with the new project system and install new packages. And, hello world with building with ASP.NET 5. And that's sort of get you going, to get you started in terms of getting your hand dirty.
And then we're going to take a break. When we come back, maybe we can cover configuration and dependency injection as we go into more details of MVC itself.
Oh, yeah. When we start looking at MVC, then we're going to need to look at how ASP.NET 5 makes dependency injection a first-class citizen of this app building world.
Very cool. So we have been doing some of the lower level stuff on ASP.NET 5, and we're going to start building on top of these frameworks all the way up to MVC 6, which is going to include Web API and all sorts of great stuff. We're having all sorts of good fun here on MVA. We'll be back after this short break. Hey, and we are back here at Microsoft Virtual Academy. We're still talking with Daniel Roth. This is part 2.
Part 2. We're moving on to MVC 6.
Yes, so if you missed part 1, stop everything, go back, watch part 1, get a little context, and then return. We're talking about ASP.NET 5. Where did you leave us?
So we figured out how to get the tooling and how to make our way around the project system, what all the folders mean, the new files. We start building some web applications, adding some middleware to the new HTTP request pipeline. But now we actually want to use, an application framework. Let's do some MVC. Let's build some web UI, but also web APIs with the same framework. That's what we're going to do.
All right, cool.
All right, so this is about MVC 6, and MVC 6 is, you're familiar with MVC. It's model view controllers, got razor views and controllers, but MVC 6 actually does so much more than it did before. It is a single aligned web stack on top of ASP.NET 5 for doing both your web UI and your web APIs. That's the idea, is to have a single aligned framework. So what we're going to do is we'll do an overview of MVC 6. We'll then talk about using MVC 6 to do your UI concerns and what's different with doing UI in MVC 6 versus MVC 5. And that's going to trip me up, I guess. And then after that, we'll talk about building web APIs, having content negotiation and JSON and XML data and those type of things.
All right, cool.
So first, let's talk about MVC 6. So the world today, like if we look at MVC, Web API, web pages, they're kind of like silos. They're 3 separate technologies, and they don't really share very much. Web pages and MVC, they do actually share a common view format. They share Razor as the syntax that you use to write your views. But beyond that, they don't share anything else. Like their HTML helpers, for example, are completely different. MVC and Web API, they look very similar. They both have notions of controllers and actions and filters and model binding and dependency resolution and so forth, but they actually share zero code. They have no code sharing at all. And there's history behind that about why that is. We wanted Web API to work outside of IIS, outside of the ASP.NET pipeline. So it couldn't have a system web dependency at all, because there's no system web when you're running outside of IIS. Whereas MVC came previously, it had already been built, it already had that system web dependency. That meant that Web API could not depend on MVCs. But we wanted to feel familiar. We wanted the concepts to be things that you know, and so a lot of the concepts were essentially duplicated. You have filters in Web API and filters in MVC. The interface looks very, very similar, but you can't use them with each other. And we'd like to fix this world, to get this world to a place where these guys share a lot more, because there's a lot of duplication in terms of concepts and in terms of code. And removing that duplication is good. It's good for you because it means that it's less confusing. Things that you learn, you can just keep reusing them across your applications and your scenarios. And it's also good for us because it means we have less duplicated code, so we can ship more features, which is, again, good for you. So that's what we're doing. And MVC 6 is that aligned stack. It is literally the next version of MVC and the next version of Web API and the next version of Web Pages, all wrapped in one package.
So making one ASP.NET really happen.
Yes, well, yeah, from a binary technical perspective, absolutely. So it's pretty cool. So you can do all your Web API and Web UI concerns within one framework. Now, how do you get started with MVC 6? So first, what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to install the package. We saw that before. Installing packages, you go to your project JSON, or you can use the NuGet package manager to add Microsoft.ASP.NET.MVC. It's the same package as MVC has always been. It's just been revved to a new version 6.0.0. Okay, then you're going to go to your startup.cs file, and you're going to need to do two things. You're going to need to add MVC as part of your request pipeline. Like there's middleware involved here so that MVC can then handle requests. You're also going to want to add MVC's services to the dependency injection abstraction in ASP.NET 5. There's a new one. Okay. And it's a common one that we use across the board in ASP.NET 5. There's actually a small, lightweight IOC container that we use to bootstrap the system. It's a very simple one. We expect that if you want to replace it with AutoFac or Ninject or your favorite IOC container, no problem. Absolutely, you can do that. If that's not something you're interested in, then you can just use the one that's there, and it will get the system going. But all the frameworks that we're building on ASP.NET 5, they reuse the same dependency injection abstraction. That means we no longer have a dependency resolver for MVC and a dependency resolver for Web API, and they're completely different. And you have to get the separate adapters for your IOC container to make those two guys work with the same container. Don't need to do that anymore because there's just one abstraction that everybody is leveraging. And that includes SignalR, the Entity Framework guys, across the board, one DI abstraction.
So looking at this here, you say in your configure method, say app.useMVC. We saw the configure method in part 1, and that makes sense to me.
Right.
Configure services and all that, that's all new.
We haven't seen that yet.
We haven't.
What is that? That is the entry point where you configure your services for your application. And we'll show you that in a second. It's just literally a method called configure services that takes the iService collection. Okay. And then you add services. You use middleware, you add services.
Okay.
Those are the verbs.
Yeah, I'm going to need to see that.
Okay. Or you can just create a new starter web app, and MVC is already wired up in there, and then you don't have to do anything because MVC is ready to go. Oh, okay. Now, if you need samples, tutorials beyond what I'm able to present here, you can find all those in the MVC repo on our GitHub organization, ASP.NET/MVC under github.com. You can find a bunch of samples there. Okay. All right, so let's get started with MVC 6. What does that look like, and how do we get hooked up to this new dependency injection system? All right, let's look at this project. So I've already created this MVC 6 demo project, and I've already done some of these steps. Let's take a look at them. So first of all, we need that package. So I've gone ahead and I added the ASP.NET MVC package to my project.json file. And that should show up then under my references node, and it does. And again, I can drill through here and see all the things that MVC depends on if that's something you're interested in. It depends on Razor and so forth. All right, so I've got the package now. Now I just need to use the middleware. I need to actually add it to my request pipeline. And it's not, MVC itself is not actually middleware, but it sits on top of routing middleware. like if you're familiar with ASP.NET today, you maybe have used ASP.NET routing, which is like a module that sits in the ASP.NET pipeline. And it deals with taking a request and parsing its URI and extracting some values from it and then figuring out which route handler should then handle that request. And MVC leveraged that heavily in all prior versions. Well, we're now in a new request pipeline, so we needed new routing middleware. And that's what MVC sits on top of. And it's basically a route handler for the new routing middleware that's in ASP.NET 5. So how do we add that thing? Let's take a look. In our startup.cs, we have our configure method that we saw last time, and we just app.useMVC. And inside this extension method, it is adding the route middleware, which you could use as a generic component. We didn't see that last time, but you can, if you want to do like just raw routing, you could do that. And then it adds MVC as the default handler for the route middleware. It also adds some default routes. Like you may say, well, where's my normal default MVC route that I know and love? You know, curly brace, controller, curly brace action, curly brace ID. Well, it's there. It's just being added by default. If you want to add it explicitly, you can do that. So here's where how you can get access to the route table right here in line when you say use MVC. And then you can just say routes.
And that's the right and primary place to do that, to add new routes.
Yeah, this is where you would add routes, right directly in here in line. And then let's see, let's give it a name. Usually it's called, I think, default, right? In fact, let's do it properly. I think it's a route. Oh, I think I need to resolve this. Let's get some.
I didn't get the sense that map route was there.
Quick chat. Using Microsoft. Not MVC, I think, is what I'm going to need. We got some IntelliSense now.
When that's gray in the using there, what does that mean?
It means it's not being used. Is it routing? I don't know. Sorry, I'm trying to remember the namespace for. We got it now? There. Yeah, okay. So it's in the routing namespace. Sorry.
Okay.
Usually, I think VS has.
Control comma is supposed to bring that in.
Yeah, was it control comma? Maybe the extension method in IntelliSense is supposed to be like.
Yeah, control dot.
Okay. So anyway, it's name. Let's give it a name. Default.
Okay.
That's just the name of the route that you can use for referencing when you want to do like link generation. And then template. This is the normal template, right? It's a controller. Now, normally, when you do this, you would say controller action ID, then you would create this anonymous object that defines default values for things. And unless you've done this like 100 times, it's kind of tricky to do yourself. But new in ASP.NET 5, the routing middleware actually supports default values right in line. This is a syntax that was introduced actually with attribute routing in MVC 5 and Web API 2, and now we've actually just brought it into the routing middleware. You can do it right here. So if I want to say my default controller is home, just say equals home. It's pretty nice. And then if I want to say my default action is index, let's do that. And then similarly, you can also define optional values in line. You don't have to go use that marker value in like you did in ASP.NET 5. You can just say ID question mark. And that says this ID value is optional. And that looks good. So there's that default route.
And this is, when we say use MVC, we're talking about MVC, which includes what we thought of as MVC and Web API. And these routes are shared as well?
Yeah. Well, you can use this route. This route is more of an MVC style route. By default, we also add attribute routing into the system, and it's just there. You don't have to explicitly add it. We think that mostly for Web APIs, you're going to be using attribute routing because that's where you really want to have control over your UI space, so that clients have something nice that they can call into.
I see.
So yeah, so this would be more for the your getting started with controllers and actions in like forum posts, that type of stuff. All right, so that's there's our route. We also need to add the MVC services. So this is a new method, and this is a special method. It has by convention. It's called configure services, and it takes as a parameter a iService collection. And this service collection is where you're going to do all your configuration for the services that you want to make available to everyone in the system.
And what is the difference between services and middleware?
So middleware sit in the HTTP request pipeline, right? So you have an HTTP request comes in, and there's a piece of middleware that can handle it, or it can hand it to the next guy, or another piece of middleware or hand it to the next guy. And someone eventually handles it and turns it into a response, and it flows back down through the middleware, and out it goes, right? Now, each of those middleware and all the other components in the system probably need different sets of logic, like, I don't know, the DB context, for example, or getting access to a logger service of some sort. Those are services that are useful in the system, and it's convenient, we found, a very common pattern to use dependency injection to make them available to all the different middleware and components in the system. So that way they just say, I need an iLogger factory. Or I need the DB context, please give me one. And then the dependency injection system just handles injecting it into that component. So that's what you're configuring here. It's a set of services that you want to make available throughout your application.
So when you're thinking IOC and dependency injection, you think services in this context. That's
Yeah.
where you go looking for those things.
Yeah, and that's what you do in this method, in configure services.
All right.
So MVC has a bunch of services that MVC itself expects to get injected, and it needs to make those available through the dependency injection system. So that's what add MVC is doing. So all the default services that MVC uses, you add here by just saying add MVC. You can also do configuration here of the MVC options, like how you want it to do certain things. And you do that by saying services.configure. And there's a pattern in ASP.NET 5, we call it the options pattern, where you create an options object, and then you make those options available, again, as a service. So that anyone that needs those options can just get them injected, use them, and use them to configure themselves in